Five, four, three, two, one.
All right, hello, willkommen, bienvenue, konnichiwa. It's time for the Amish Inquisition yet again, episode 182 on Sunday the 2nd of May. I'm Amish Phil.
I'm Amish Matt.
And tonight's guest is the author of The Lake Michigan Mothman, High Strangeness in the Midwest, and he's also the co-founder of the Singular Fortean Society. Tobias Wayland, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I love your website. Particularly this singular14.com it is, by the way. And I like this news section you have where like every 2 or 3 days a little article comes up of some weirdness, some high strangeness. And it's just sort of, it's like enough to digest without being sort of overwhelmed because there's so much of this stuff on the internet, isn't there?
Oh, for sure. And thank you. By the way, although I have to say, really, the actual aesthetic for that website that was created completely by my wife and partner Emily, and I like to tell people that honestly, and this is more or less true. If it wasn't for her, I would basically be just like another madman ranting on some cheap blogger site in like green text on a black background or something. So anybody who goes to singular40.com and is like, "Wow, this looks great," that is all Emily. So I'm very lucky to have her. But yeah, no, that news section, thank you again for that. That's something that we take a decent amount of pride in, I think, because one of the reasons that we started the Singular Fortean Society, one of the reasons that we really focused on like paranormal journalism, was because of the sort of lack of, serious journalism in the paranormal field. Like there isn't a lot of objective reporting on this stuff, and so, if we can provide that for people in a format that is enjoyable for them to, experience, then that's great. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Do you feel there's quite a lot of sort of sensationalism naturally with the, I mean, that there has to be surely.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's, I would say about at least half of the articles we write on, say some video that's sort of making its way, around the internet is because of the disingenuous way that I've seen it represented within the community. And so I feel like we have an obligation to give people the actual background of it, where it really came from, what people, the people who filmed it really said they experienced. And if we don't have that information, then people need to know, and so, yeah, you're right. There is a lot of sensationalism and that kind of due diligence isn't always paid, when it comes to these subjects, unfortunately.
I guess this is where, I guess by calling it the Singular Fortean Society, you're sort of drawing on this philosophy from Charles Fort and his writings. Would that be correct? And this sort of this sort of open inquiry, being skeptical but open-minded at the same time.
Absolutely. And that's also the reason that we don't really specialize in any one particular area, much like Fort, who said one measures a circle beginning anywhere. We take that holistic approach to these subjects where we're interested in all of it. And frankly, once you really start to look into these various phenomena, you'll find that they share a lot of similarities. There are a lot of narrative similarities, like between really every kind of report that we receive, despite some relatively superficial differences. So yeah, we definitely take some inspiration from Fort and his work.
And it's such a broad subject. It's like, even if you just took cryptids, which is like one arm of Fortean subjects. I mean, there's another great page on your website where you've got like the index of all the different cryptids that have been collected, you know, anecdotally or thereof over the years. So, I mean, why Mothman? What drew you to Mothman in particular? Because, I mean, you could have picked all sorts.
It was purely by chance, actually. Back in the spring of 2017, I saw a trio of winged creature sightings come through the Mutual UFO Network case management system. You know, there were 3 anonymous reports, and they all sort of described this big winged creature in Chicago. And MUFON had this short article they'd written up about it on their site. And I thought, well, you know, our readers would probably be interested in this. And so I just wrote a short little article based on that and published it. And I honestly thought that was going to be the end of it. I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. You know, it was just one more article about weird stuff from the internet, basically. And so like that, I mean, that's not what happened, of course. I mean, and then after that was published, I started seeing more and more of these sighting reports come out, and they were being published to these websites that I wasn't really familiar with, Phantoms and Monsters and UFO Clearinghouse. And so I thought, well, I mean, you know, if I want to do my due diligence, I'd better reach out and talk to these guys and sort of see what they're getting. And, you know, it was Lon Strickler over at Phantoms and Monsters and Manuel Navarrete over at UFO Clearinghouse. I contacted them both that summer, June and July, respectively, 2017, and interviewed them separately. And they were very you know, sort of forthright when it came to this subject. They were more than willing to talk about their reports. And what sort of struck me at that time with them too was they didn't have any particular narrative that they were excuse me, that they were pushing. You know, so many people in this field sort of have their pet narrative, you know, where this box that they try to fit everything that they come across into. And that really wasn't the case with them. And so, you know, I was impressed by that. And a short time later, you know, as these reports continued to come in, you know, we discovered that we had some mutual friends in the community. And, you know, I was asked to help investigate, you know, because we're not too far away from most of those sightings, especially in the Chicago area. And so they asked if we wouldn't mind, you know, helping with the actual investigation. And then really by that time anyway, we were already receiving our own reports from people. And so at that point, it really just made sense.
And these are sort of very modern sightings. 2017, you're saying?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, all the way through 2020 at this point. And then some of the oldest sighting reports that we've received, I think the oldest one that I've personally taken goes back to like 1957. Yeah. So basically the late 50s all the way through 2020, people, you know, have been claiming to see some kind of winged humanoid around the Great Lakes region, specifically right around like Lake Michigan.
Now, I've not read the Mothman prophecy or seen the film, but does this tie in somehow?
You know, I think people who have read Keel's work, well, I guess I can't speak for literally everybody, but I certainly think that there is a connection. It's certainly a very similar phenomenon, and it shares a lot of the sort of paranormal aspects of what Keel was reporting when he wrote that book back in I believe when did it come out? 71, I think, something like that. Yep. 71, 75, somewhere in there. And so, yeah, I mean, certainly people are describing this large, black, winged, red-eyed creature, right? In basically the same way people were describing the same thing back in the mid to late 60s in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. So, you add to that sort of some of the narrative qualities that people include in their modern reports, like this overwhelming feeling of fear, or feeling sort of like struck or hypnotized almost by this thing's eyes. And I think the similarities are just too many to ignore.
So are all these sightings quite close geographically then?
Yeah, I mean, Lake Michigan is huge, of course. The Great Lakes are more like inland seas than actual lakes. But it's in a good few 100-mile radius around Lake Michigan that we've received the bulk of these reports. So I think the reason that I really included Lake Michigan as far as in the name and everything is that it was just sort of a convenient geographic point. I don't know that there's any link or anything, but certainly, the reports are coming from within, a few 100 miles of this specific Great Lake.
Well, I mean, the Great Lake, Michigan, I mean, it sounds like the perfect habitat for a Mothman. Did you not say?
I suppose. I mean, I don't know. And that actually reminds me of some of the interesting questions I think that arise out of this, because you mentioned something like habitat, right? Because there are people who believe that this is some sort of undiscovered, biological species. And if you want to believe that, you do have to ask questions like, where does it live? What does it eat? How does it fly? Because you look at the description and there's no way that it should be able to actually get off the ground. I mean, people are describing this thing that's like, 7 or 8 feet tall with like a 12-foot wingspan, maybe 15 feet. And frankly, like, even if it had hollow bones, you need at least a 20 to 25 foot wingspan to get like a person off of the ground, let alone this 7 to 8 foot tall monster. Right. So, where would it live where people couldn't find it? Right. Like Lake Michigan, does it live underwater? I mean, a lot of those things, they defy reason, so, yeah, I don't know. It's a good question, but for me, I think it more than anything, it sort of points towards the very real possibility that regardless of what it actually is, it is almost certainly not some sort of otherwise mundane, undiscovered species.
And it's part of the mystery that makes it attractive, isn't it? This is what captures our imagination when there are things that we don't have suitable or acceptable answers for. Oh,
certainly. I mean, I think especially with Mothman too, and I think we owe a lot of that to John Keel because of what he wrote in the Mothman Prophecies. Because really, I mean, Lake Michigan is also known for like that whole area is known for everything from UFOs to Thunderbirds, right? And so, in the same vein as the Mothman Prophecies, you have all of these seemingly disparate but wondrous phenomena happening in this relatively small geographic area, and it really does spark people's imaginations, honestly. And so, especially because it's so weird that, like we were just saying, it sort of defies easy explanation by any sort of like known biological science. And so that really allows people to just go in just whatever crazy direction that they want to go with it as far as trying to explain it, to everything from, speculating about parallel universes or multiple dimensions to, extraterrestrials and mad science experiments. I mean, it's got everything you could possibly want.
Yeah. And the fact that you've got multiple different phenomena being reported in such a, what would you say, maybe a tight geographical reason, that needs an explanation, and there must be an explanation, but the fact that it's happening so closely together, it requires one.
Oh, certainly. And honestly, there are some sightings that I think do have prosaic explanations. Certainly, I would say, just off the top of my head, maybe 40% of the sightings we've received could be explained by something like a large bird. Specifically in the Chicago area, if you look at the migratory patterns of great blue herons, through that area, having been affected by, climate change and the destruction of their wetland habitats, you've got more herons in that area for longer periods of time than you used to even, 10, 15, 20 years ago. By, in order of magnitude, really, there's quite a few more. And so, I really developed a couple of different profiles for these sightings, where you've got this first profile where, it's somebody who saw something big that was flying, and they didn't really see it for very long, and it wasn't particularly close, and they didn't make out a lot of good details, and maybe they even have a few details in there that sound an awful lot like a bird, like some people would describe having heard this sort of screech like train brakes, right? And literally anybody at all can go online right now, go to YouTube, Google great blue heron noises or something, and that's literally what they sound like. I mean, it's a perfect match. And so I think part of the sightings, or some of the sightings rather, are misidentifications, but then you've got this other profile that just literally couldn't possibly be, where you've got people describing something that they're seeing on the ground maybe, or, flying relatively close. They have more specific details like the glowing red eyes, or they're able to make out more specific details regarding the creature's wings, or different limbs that a bird wouldn't have, like humanoid arms and legs, things like that. And those are the ones where people will often report the seemingly paranormal aspects as well. The overriding fear, the possible feeling hypnotized. And maybe they'll experience some sort of psychic phenomenon, or sometimes people will be plagued with haunting phenomena after some kind of event like that.
After the sighting, so it goes on.
Yeah. No, I've had people report. There was a lady, now this wasn't around Lake Michigan, but there was a lady out in Maryland, actually, who, and this was an interesting one to me, after her and her son had seen something like that on their way home one night. They had this radio that had worked perfectly prior to this, but after their sighting, she said that it would just turn itself on randomly. And we had I had a lady up here in Madison, actually, which is where we live, and that is sort of within the Lake Michigan area. And so there, that lady actually described this whole series of weird haunting events surrounding her mother seeing this, black winged, red-eyed monster. And so she would talk about how they would hear a baby crying in their apartment, and there was no baby, and they couldn't find any source for it, or they would be sleeping at night and they would hear what sounded like somebody throwing everything out of all of their cupboards, all of their dishes and everything crashing to the floor, and they would go running out, and nothing was disturbed, literally nothing had happened. And so you take Mothman out of that, and most people would look at it and say, oh, well, your house was haunted, but you add Mothman in, and it gets a little weirder, certainly. And I think sort of in the tradition of Charles Fort, we can't necessarily just put each of those into its little box and pretend like there's no relationship.
Yeah, these things deserve open-minded yet skeptical inquiry, which is what you're here to do.
And, yeah, certainly. Yeah. it's, and that goes back sort of to the way we report on things. Most of these articles that I have written about the Lake Michigan Mothman, they've been written journalistically, and so I try to be as objective as possible, certainly, and I leave my opinion out of it. I want to give people all of the facts that we have and everything we were able to confirm. And then as far as like what I think it is, well, you can buy our book or something if you care about that. But if you just want the actual facts of the case as we have them so far, then that's, mostly published in our articles.
Just going to the book for a minute. I mean, how did the book work? Is it like a compilation of these accounts, or how have you structured it?
Sure. So really the impetus behind me writing it was, I had seen so much misinformation on the internet. I mean, that's what the internet does. It's a giant misinformation machine. And I thought, well, I could try to set, 1,000 people straight on various forums and social media sites every single day for the rest of my life. Or I can write this book and say, okay, well, this is everything that's gone into this investigation. This is how it happened. This is how it was investigated. This is all of the information we have so far. Do with it what you will. And then, every time it comes up, I can just be like, well, did you read the book? Because it's literally all in there.
Mm. Right. So you're going through, and are these historical accounts as well, or just the accounts that you've investigated personally?
It's everything that sort of fell under the umbrella of the Lake Michigan Mothman investigation. And so that's pretty much everything published since we started getting into it in 2017. And so there are quite a few reports taken by Lon, quite a few taken by Manuel, and then, quite a few taken by us as well. But I didn't include anything that hadn't been investigated or reported on by one of us three, basically. So although I would say, I didn't exclude anything on purpose. I didn't see any historical reports or anything that hadn't been investigated or reported on by one of us anyway. So I would certainly have been interested to see that if they existed.
Yeah. I mean, as far as these different accounts and these witness testimonies you take and whatnot, what would be some of the most compelling ones that you've heard?
Oh, sure. There's quite a few. To me, well, I guess first of all, I would want to emphasize to people that, whatever image I think that people form in their minds of the kind of person who reports this kind of thing, just get rid of it. Because it could be literally anybody. They could work in your office. They might be the server at your restaurant. They might go to your church. You could pass them in the grocery store. You wouldn't look at them twice, I promise. And that, to me, has been one of the most compelling aspects, is the just relative normality of all of the witnesses. We're not talking about a bunch of weirdos who look like they just walked out of a 60s era contactee convention. It's just, they could be literally anybody. And so some of the most interesting cases we've received, I know that there was one in Woodstock, and this one really stuck with Emily and I both, honestly, because these particular people were some of the most just genuine and welcoming folks that we really ever had the opportunity to go and visit with and everything. But beyond that, they are both professionals, and they had a lot to lose by talking to us, frankly. And so this particular sighting was February 2019, Woodstock, Illinois. a man was driving home from Walgreens. He had gone down to the drugstore to pick up some milk, of all things. And that's most people too. Like, honestly, it's usually people just going about their business and then running headlong into this impossible whatever it is. So anyway, he's out running this perfectly mundane errand, just picking up milk, and he's driving home. And he's driving past the Dewfield Pond Conservation Area, which is, it's a relatively good sized like wetlands conservation area. It's got some woods and stuff. And as he's going past the entrance, as he's coming up on the entrance, he sees something step out into the road in front of him. And he described it as this huge, like 7 or 8 feet tall, at least, hairy humanoid with these large leathery wings coming out of its back. And it's dark out. It was like 8 p.m. in February. So, it had been dark out for a couple hours at that point. And so he really only saw it in his headlights for the several seconds that it took for it to walk out in front of him and cross the road. And then it was basically gone. On the other side of that road is the McHenry County fairgrounds. And so it's like a pretty wide open field. And then there's some woods, and like it gets like more rural and stuff beyond that. And so he sees it cross in front of him, and he watches it as it, goes off the road on the other side, and then he loses it. And that was a sighting. And he went out the next day, he and his wife, and, they were poking around and they thought maybe they found like this weird footprint, but, it had been corrupted by other people's prints at that point, because there were, people would go back into that conservation area. People walk their dogs there and stuff. And so there's one print that they thought they had found, and it looked to me like, some people had stepped on it with their boots or whatever. And so that wasn't as compelling as maybe it could have been. Did they talk to you about like the frame of mind when this was happening?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I'll definitely get to that. I guess.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No. It's.
I'm thinking because
okay.
I would be shitting my pants, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's fair. And he was, frankly, yeah. I mean, this was a very powerful event for this man,
He was on his own. He wasn't with his wife in the car, was he not?
No, she was at home. So he saw it by himself. But yeah, I talked to him on the phone first, and, I was able to convince him that, maybe Emily and I should come down and take a look around and stuff. And he agreed to that. And so, yeah, like we showed up, I met him. We met his wife. They're wonderful people. They were nice enough to take us out to the area. I did find a really weird footprint that looked like a giant bear, human footprint, which was bizarre, but it was just one single print, which I thought was weird. So I didn't know what to make of that, but, I documented it. And you're right. In terms of the effect that this had on this witness, of course he was scared. He had seen something that defies, at the risk of repeating myself, endlessly, it really just defied all reason. Like, he couldn't make sense of it because it didn't make any sense. And so, he was shaken by that, certainly. I think he wanted to be able to express himself. He wanted an outlet where he could discuss his sighting, because these have a real effect on people, and so he was sort of torn between wanting to find people who would listen to him and the fear of this sighting getting out and ruining their lives, basically. And so, of course they insisted on anonymity, and I didn't blame them. I was fine with that, frankly, considering, But yeah, I mean, it was powerful. And it's one thing, and I say this a lot, but it's true. And it's one thing to read about these sightings online or, in my book or wherever. It is a whole nother animal to be face to face with another adult who is, sweating, terrified to tell you about something that, happened days ago or weeks ago, but has affected them so much that in broad daylight, they're still afraid to talk about it. It's a powerful, experience, and it's difficult to relate that, I think, to people because people hear like a winged, well, in this case, like a winged Bigfoot or something, and they're gonna laugh a little bit. Like some people snicker because it sounds crazy, but I mean, it is what it is. And I don't think this guy was lying. If he was, I can't figure out why, because he sure as hell didn't get anything out of it.
So this is someone with like a high social standing, someone who's respected. I mean, I presume, do you not name their occupations or anything? Is it complete anonymity? Yeah,
I mean, given the size of this town,
right? Yeah,
if I wanted to leave out
any identifiable characteristics,
really anything that anybody could use, so I can say his wife was or still is, I think. She has a job in like city government, like she's a politician on some level. And so, I mean, literally could be a career ending kind of event for her. And it's just.
Do you know what struck me listening to that story is you mentioned that the guy is in his truck on his own, and then he sees this thing in the road, and then he goes home, and then the pair of them go out the next day to look for verification, to look for evidence.
Yeah.
And if I went to the supermarket and got home and said to my wife, I've just seen a Bigfoot with wings, we need to go out tomorrow morning and look for evidence, she would laugh her balls off at me. I mean,
that's what usually happens.
That speaks volumes to me. That speaks absolute volumes to me about how seriously this couple took it.
Yes. And, it's funny you mentioned that because the most common narrative that I receive from witnesses and why most people don't discuss their sightings is what'll happen is they'll have this sighting, could be a Bigfoot, UFO, Mothman, whatever. And they want to tell somebody, this is a powerful event, sometimes traumatic, frankly. And like, they want to tell somebody. So they go to a loved one, could be a spouse, sibling, parent, whatever, right? Close friend. And they'll tell them. And this person that they trusted, this person that they want to confide in, they just laugh at them, and that's devastating for people. And so they shut up about it, and they don't talk about it again until they find somebody like me, who will actually take them seriously. And so I think that particular case very much benefited from the fact that his wife did take him seriously, and she didn't react like so many other people do in that situation where, they just kind of laugh at somebody who needs them to listen.
And I think this is maybe an advantage you have, Tobias, with having the Singular Fortean Society behind you, in that when you approach people or they approach you, you can at least direct them to this thing which shows, you've got your sort of, I was going to try and speak Latin then, was it modus operandi? I'm getting the words wrong, I think.
That sounds right.
Like your mission statement, it's like, rather than just some random bloke saying I collect weird stories, you've got this sort of, this what would you say, like a legitimacy behind your research.
Well, thank you for that. Most people don't use legitimacy in the same sentence as Mothman very often. And so I appreciate you doing that, honestly. But no, thank you. I think that we do try very hard to cultivate an atmosphere of professionalism and to make it clear that we approach this from an experiential standpoint. That is to say, like it or not, really, most of what we have in terms of evidence is the testimony of people who said they've experienced something. And we can do whatever we can to corroborate that, by following up and sort of verifying the details that are capable of being verified. But at the end of the day, this is about people experiencing something. And what we need to do, I think, in order to gain a better understanding of it, and really just as human beings, frankly, is treat those people with respect and take them seriously and sort of consider the effect that these things have had on them, And so, we try to be very upfront about that to make people comfortable.
Because you mentioned before, some people have had, this has been a traumatic incident in their lives. Maybe you could explain a bit more about that, sort of the longer lasting effects that people have had.
Yeah, certainly. I honestly, going back to the woman in Madison that I spoke with, and her mother, and sort of the effect that this has had on their family. I mean, her mother is still terrified to this day of this event. She claimed to have seen this black-winged, red-eyed monster twice, and it was very much sort of the situation that I discussed before, where she told her family about it, and her husband, I think, he didn't really come out and say that he believed her, but he at least was a good enough husband not to openly mock her or anything. But the rest of her family, they really just made fun of her and would joke about it, and of course it had in effect on her. She didn't want to talk about it anymore, but it was this thing that terrified her. She was afraid for years of seeing this again, and she felt like she didn't really have anybody to confide in, and that happens all the time. I mean, I had a guy out in McWanago, Wisconsin, which is a rural community outside of Milwaukee, and I talked to him. Emily and I went out and he showed us around his sighting area and everything. And this was one where, again, he's a grown man and he's telling us about this sighting he had. And he's just visibly shaken. And it's broad daylight on like a mid-morning on a beautiful spring day. And, he's just sweating, relating this story to us. And, it's just sad, frankly. It breaks my heart some to see these people so visibly afraid, and often the fear is not just the experience itself. It's, they're afraid it's going to happen again. They're afraid it's going to come back, and I don't blame them. I mean, this guy saw it outside of his house. So
what was that sighting like?
Sure. So this guy, he was coming home. It was relatively late one night, and he's talking to his friend on his cell phone. And at that time, he lived with his parents in McWanago, Wisconsin. And like I said, it's a relatively rural area, so the houses are pretty spaced out. And they have sort of a longer gravel driveway with this larger area at the end of it where you can kind of turn around and park.
Sure. And
so he had pulled into the driveway and he had turned around and backed in. So he's facing the road. And the only light out there was this lamppost about 50 feet away at the edge of the road at the end of their driveway. Mm-hmm. And so, he decides he's talking to his friend on the phone, and he decides he's going to stay outside in his van and just finish this conversation rather than try to take it into the house and wake his parents up. And so he's talking to his friend, and at some point during that conversation, he's just kind of looking out the windshield in front of him as he's talking. He sees this silhouette standing in front of his van. And he notices it because it's sort of backlit by the ambient light from that lamppost.
His headlights are off, I take it, are they?
Right. Yeah. So he had turned the car off and the headlights were off and everything. And so he sees this silhouette and he's like, well, what the hell is this? And then he turns the headlights on and he sees what he described as, I believe his exact words were oh boy, what was it? It was like bat dragon something. Yeah, I swear. Well, and this is a whole nother area of like interest with people struggling to describe this stuff. You know what I mean? Where you get these phrases that people come up with, and you're like, some of them do sound a little silly sometimes. But so he turns his headlights on, and when he elaborated on that to me, what he really described it as was this sort of scaly skinned, 8-foot tall humanoid creature, and it had these sort of large black eyes. And he said it had these membranous wings. So think like kind of bat wings, right? Sort of wrapped around itself.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And it's standing there. And at that point, like he's telling his friend about it. And his friend thinks he's just giving him the business, Like at first, his friend is just like, like you're kidding, right? But, I think he did convince him at a certain point, like, no, I'm really seeing something. And this is insane. And his friend did later corroborate, like, well, yeah, he did tell me he saw this. So he sees this thing and standing there maybe 6, maybe 8 feet in front of the van. And he looks at it and this, lasts seconds, obviously. It's not standing there for like 10 minutes or anything. But it wasn't like long enough for him to get out and ask it what it wanted. And so it's standing there in his headlights, and he said it sort of blurred and disappeared. And he wasn't sure if that meant that it had moved faster than his eye could track, if that meant it literally like teleported or something. Who knows? But that was his experience. And again, this is a guy like we met. We went out to his house, and he showed us everything, and certainly everything was where he said it was, as far as things we were able to, confirm about the details of the sighting.
How soon after did you arrive to investigate?
This one was a little longer, actually. I want to say with him, his sighting had actually been in the spring of 2017, but we didn't hear about it from him until the spring of 2018, I believe. And then, which is even more impressive because it was still scaring the crap out of him, a whole year later. Wow. The Woodstock sighting, we got down there relatively quickly. I think it was a week or two later.
And you're reliant on when you get the reports as well, aren't you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, there's not much I can do about that, obviously.
Wow. Anyway, sorry, Matt, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, like when you were talking about the different ways that it's been reported as moving. So like that last guy said it sort of blurred and disappeared. And then like, was it the one in Woodstock where he said it tracked across the road? Is there kind of a common theme around, because it's one thing to have this image of, a 7-8 foot tall man with red eyes and wings or whatever in front of you. But then how does it move away from people? Is there like a common theme towards that?
Yeah, most people, I think, either see it in flight or it takes off in flight, during their sighting.
Okay. It flies off during the sighting. Because
people have reported that. Where they'll see it and then, it'll spread its wings and just take off. I think more common is people seeing it already in flight. That's probably the most common. Every once in a while you'll get one. Least common, I think, is probably Woodstock, where you saw it walking. Mm-hmm. That isn't reported as common. Most commonly, it would be reported either as flying or maybe during the sighting itself, they'll see it, spread its wings and take off. Sometimes without flapping its wings, where it'll just seemingly just kind of take off like a helicopter. Yeah.
And so going back to the driveway one, other than the flickering out at the end, he didn't see it move, it just stood there. It just appeared, did it, and stood there, or he only noticed it I don't know.
He only noticed it, so it could have just appeared. It could have walked up. Who knows? Like he was on the phone, and I don't think he was
paying attention.
He was paying like attention necessarily, yeah, until he kind of looked up and noticed this thing there.
Wow, that's wild. I mean, it must just be absolutely terrifying. Because I mean, you obviously know from talking to these people, as far as you're concerned, these people absolutely believe what they have seen. Whatever the explanation might be, they are absolutely convinced that they've seen something.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I have no reason to believe that anybody with whom I have spoken was attempting to lie or hide anything. They certainly don't get anything out of it. It's not like, like we're not paying for reports or anything, like there's obviously that would be a huge conflict of interest. So yeah, I think most of the people, I believe the reason that they're sharing these stories is because they need to, it's if nothing else, it's a sort of cathartic release. Yeah. I think it's a comfort to be able to share them with people, who aren't just going to laugh at them.
Have you had any sort of historical reports where someone has come forward recently who's seen something years or decades ago? Because I mean, we had Terry Lovelace on a couple of months ago who had an abduction experience back in the 70s, and it wasn't until decades later that he felt that he needed to get this out. Is this something you've come across?
Oh, certainly. Quite a few. I mean, the oldest one was from 1957. There's a guy named Gerald Therese who reached out to us, and he said that he was out hunting in Illinois. I forget the name of the town. I'd have to look it up. But he was out hunting, and he saw this giant winged bird man thing as he was out hunting. It was a pretty quick sighting. But it didn't really share many. I mean, it was during the day, so he got a pretty decent look at it. But of course, he reached out to us in, I want to say it was just last year. So quite a bit of time had passed between his experience and when he related it to us. And so he was very upfront about that. He was like, "Look, this is everything I can remember from when it happened. I didn't think that anybody else has ever seen anything like this. And so I didn't want to share it because it just seemed too weird." Yeah. But then he'd seen one of our other articles and was like, well, obviously, I can talk to these people. But yeah, so that's the oldest one I've received. What's interesting about Gerald too, is he had subsequently a UFO sighting when he was in the Army. So he was at this missile base where he was stationed just south of Chicago. And he had this UFO sighting, like he's on guard duty, and he sees this, like saucer-shaped craft with, a ring of lights around it. And, he called his duty commander and everything and reported it. And it was investigated by Project Blue Book. And he said, he told me that he had received a call a couple days later from somebody claiming to be J. Allen Hynek, who then told him that this isn't going to be verbatim. I'm going to paraphrase. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it amounted to somebody calling him, claiming to be J. Allen Hynek and saying hey, I was told to tell you that was just in advertising airplane, yeah. And I was like, well, that sounds very Project Blue Book from back then, because they very much wanted to just sort of sweep UFOs under the rug, find, prosaic explanations for everything, whether they fit or not. And the fact that it was investigated by Blue Book was something I was able to verify, because that's all, public info.
No.
And so, that's in their records that they did investigate his UFO sighting. But that's just one of the connections that pop up in this investigation. You know, like, I'm not saying that those events are connected, but I do think it's interesting that this guy saw this, Mothman, whatever, and then a few years later in the relatively the same geographic area, some miles apart, but still, he sees this UFO. We had another guy, Jonathan Lane in Rockford, Illinois, who contacted us recently about a sighting he had in 2016. This isn't historical, but it's very similar, where he saw this large black red-eyed winged creature, and in the same spot a couple years later, he sees this weird, like, luminous UFO.
This is an interesting sort of correlation, isn't it? I mean, I wouldn't, without getting into what the explanations might be, because you can take it various different ways, but the fact that the same people are seeing different phenomena, but in a similar location, that's weird.
It's definitely weird. I spoke to another lady named Paula out in Wakanda, Illinois, and
Wakanda?
she said,
Wakanda?
Yeah, no, it's not spelled the same. No, yeah, sorry, like it's there's no Black Panther,
because they've got loads of alien tech in Wakanda.
I know, right? Yeah. So in 2014, she saw this weird beam of light. She said she was in her apartment and she was looking out the window, and she saw this weird beam of light come down, like, across the street. And so it wasn't like, she looked and it wasn't from a helicopter or anything. And it just kind of like shone around a little bit and then began to retract. And then she said it came back down really quickly. And she was terrified because she was like, oh, it must have seen that, like, I saw it and maybe it was coming back for me. And so she kind of like falls out of her seat at that point. But then it just kind of like retracts again and disappears. But she said it was totally silent. It didn't look like like a searchlight or anything like that. It looked almost like a solid light cone or something. Wow. And which was weird enough. But then 2 years later, in that same spot, she was taking her garbage out early one morning. And in the exact same place where she had seen that beam 2 years prior, she said she saw something that looked like this huge, hunched over, like, hairy humanoid with these big leathery wings. And she said that it started moving towards her, but the way she described it moving, and actually, I wish I would have thought of this when Matt brought it up the first time before too, but this was one of the more interesting ways somebody described this thing as moving, is she said that when it came towards her, it didn't look like it was, like, striding forward. It looked like somebody moving through a strobe light, where it just kind of made these little jumps towards her, like appearing and disappearing, right? And so she's terrified, obviously, and she, like, turns around, she's fumbling with her keys to get back into her apartment building, and she's like, she finally gets the key in the lock and turns it and gets the door open, and she's sure this thing has to be right behind her.
My God.
Absolutely sure of it. And she turns around and there's nothing there. It's just gone. And so, she goes inside and
No, but that's what happens is when she turns around inside the apartment block and it's there.
There you go.
In the horror,
that's the jump scare.
That would be the Hollywood ending to that story.
That sounds similar to the guy on these gravelly drives, doesn't it? The flickering and the strobing kind of thing.
And that was. Did you say that was early morning as well? That she was taking the garbage out.
Yeah, I was like 5 or 6 a.m. I think.
So it was daylight.
That time of year, it might have been. I'm trying to think of what time of year that took place. I think it might have been early spring. So it would have been gloomy at least. It wouldn't have been bright.
Because I would have thought maybe a common thing was with a lot of these sighting type events is that they happen at night.
most often, I mean, Gerald's was during the day. I think a good amount of the misidentifications happen during the day, honestly. But yeah, I think certainly most commonly with the potentially paranormal sightings, yeah, you're talking about nighttime sightings.
You know, in your book, do you sort of put any theories or possible explanations for each case in the book, or do you leave it open?
Well, no, I definitely do. I mean, there are some that are demonstrably, large birds, and I'm always going to point that out. Sort of like what we were talking about before. I'm really doing a disservice to the community if I pretend like something is weird when it's not.
Yeah, sure.
And so, yeah, I mean, anytime I felt comfortable, because I had enough evidence to really point towards one explanation or another, I definitely do mention that. And I do enjoy getting into some of the speculative discussion, I think, about the actual paranormal stuff. I don't have any definitive answers, obviously. And so I don't really have a very strong stance, one way or another regarding what it might be if there really is something, unusual going on there. But yeah, I like to speculate. I think there's an interesting connection between this phenomenon and probably very, very many paranormal phenomena, from UFOs to ghosts to Bigfoot to whatever, that sort of interacts directly with human consciousness. Certainly seems to be connected to that in some way, and the manipulation thereof,
Now I thought you were going to say human psychology, but you chose the word consciousness, which has a different connotation. So what are you, if we ask you to speculate, what are you sort of getting at with the manipulation of consciousness? Right.
So what that really means to me is I don't know that everything that's sort of reported as being physically present is necessarily physically present in the way we would conceive of it, Yep. And I think that when you start talking to witnesses who will report things like, like that fear that I brought up, or Paula, for instance, described specifically feeling a palpable sense of evil when she saw like this thing. And so that to me speaks to something happening on a non-physical level. Like there's some sort of immaterial phenomenon that has a real effect on people. Sometimes people will report being afraid prior to their sighting.
That's what I was going to say. Like, when a common thing with haunted houses is they feel the temperature drop. So like a preemptive feeling. So this is something that you've got from witnesses, that there's a preemptive effect.
Yeah, there was a man, this is the case that comes to mind immediately. There's a man in Waukegan, Illinois, which is just north of Chicago. This was back in the 70s, and he had gone out to this, relatively isolated parking lot to help his friend jumpstart his car battery. So his friend's car battery was dead, and he went out there to jump it. And he's out there with his friend in this parking lot, and there are some like silos nearby. And as he's setting the jumper cables up and everything, like he just becomes terrified, and he has no idea why. Just all of a sudden, he's just inexplicably afraid. And so he looks around and he sees this black-winged, red-eyed thing like staring at them from some distance. And at that point, he's not going to keep trying to jump this car. He's like, no, we got to get the hell out of here right now. And they jump into his car and take off. And he said that this thing came down, like swooped at the car and scratched their car up.
What?
And I got this from his daughter, who said that she remembered it happening when she was a teenager, because he came home and was visibly like shaken, and he showed her this, like she saw the scratches on his car. So I mean, there is some, I think, some level of physicality to this. I just think that there's some, there certainly is some interaction, with human consciousness as well, because, you get things like these seemingly psychic phenomena or something associated with them.
Yeah, because I mean, that story is a mix of the two, isn't it? Because he has the feeling of dread or evil preemptively, and then there is seemingly a physical interaction as well. So that's both 2 for 1, baby.
It's bizarre, and it's difficult to explain, because on the one hand, if you want to say that it is this entirely paranormal entity that is just projecting itself into people's minds, well, how does it do things like leave a footprint or scratch a car? Like it's got to be some combination, seemingly.
Yeah, I guess this goes into the sort of interdimensional theory or aspect of this.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I think
if you were
that,
to speculate,
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think whatever it is, yeah, like if it is happening as reported, if we're willing to assume that, then there absolutely has to be some aspect to it that goes beyond our current understanding of like the physical sciences.
Yeah. And what we up to? I think, can't we account for 6% of all matter and energy in the universe thus far?
I don't even know if it's that much, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's something. It's in the low. It's a handful. So yeah, there are many mysteries. There's a lot. I think we kid ourselves in our modern society. We think we know it all, and I think we're in danger of becoming unstuck.
Oh, certainly.
What are you working on at the moment, Tobias? So you any current projects? More books in the offing? Going to write more books? What's going on?
Sure. So currently, we are getting ready to film a documentary on the Lake Michigan Mothman case.
Cool.
We're doing that with Small Town Monsters. So if anybody's not familiar with Small Town Monsters' work, like definitely check out their documentaries. They're fantastic. So at the end of May, we're going to film on the trail of the Lake Michigan Mothman. I am currently working on my second book, Strange Tales of the Impossible. It's going to feature not just winged humanoids, because we really do investigate a lot of things other than that. And so this is a good opportunity to talk about the wide variety of things that we have investigated so far. So I'm excited about that. And I think that is on track to be released this July. I want to get it out before we appear at the Haunted America conference, certainly. So yeah, we're working hard to make that happen.
Cool. Any Snallygasters in the new book?
Snallygaster? No, I don't think that's a thing that people actually see. I mean, it's a great story, and who doesn't want to see like this tentacle winged monstrosity? But yeah, no, that's that's a good one. We have that on our website too. I remember digging up old newspaper articles to write that, and they are a hoot.
My favourite, which I was telling the kids about at tea time, is the Slide Rock Bolter.
Yeah, you gotta watch out for those.
Yeah, if any of you listening have seen the movie Tremors, and you had nightmares as a kid, maybe don't go to singularfortean.com and look up Slide Rock Bolters, because there's some parallels there, definitely. Well, Tobias, it's been great. We need to wrap up. We're knocking up on time already.
Yeah.
Where's it gone?
It just flies by.
Yeah, it's been great to meet you. Don't forget.
Thank you. You too.
All the links will be in the description. Eavesdroppers. Don't forget to check out the website. Check out Tobias's book, and we'll say just hang on the line for 2 minutes while we play ourselves out, Tobias. And we'll catch you on the flip side. Don't touch that dial. Right then, we're back.
The dwarf and the mother of madness.
Oh, nailed it. Nailed it.
Yeah, nicely done.
Yeah, that was our chat with Tobias Wayland from the Singular Fortean Society.